Presentation 3 is about public sector and third sector organisations. So we're going to understand the purpose of the public sector and the third sector in the economy and how they're controlled and financed. And we're going to be aware of how the public and third sectors operate differently from the private sector. First and foremost, we're going to speak about the public sector, and there are two aspects to the public sector. We have central government, which is based at Westminster, and of course we have our Scottish Parliament at Holyrood, and then we have local authorities. So the first point are the local authorities. The purpose of local authorities or local councils is to deliver essential services to the area they serve. There are 32 local authorities in Scotland. These services that the local authorities provide for us include education, so you being able to go to your local school and receive an education. These are funded by the local authorities, your local leisure centres, community centres, recycling, bin collection, all these sorts of things are provided by the local authority. Now a little bit more about them then. Decision making is carried out by elected councillors for these local authorities. Everyday running is carried out by managers and employees. The funding comes from Scottish Government, and that depends upon the number of people living in each local authority, as well as council tax from authority residents. So all households in Renfrewshire Council, for example, will pay a council tax to the local authority based upon the value of their house. Some public services also carry a charge. For example, if you're a member of the Lagoon Leisure Centre and you want to go for a swim, you'll pay a membership or you'll pay an amount of money to get in for a swim. And these obviously are the charge we're talking about. They aim to provide a quality service and stay within the allocated budget. So the Scottish Government will give the money to the local authorities as well as the council tax, and that's the money they receive. They have to try and stick to that, each local authority. Central government now then, we're talking here, as I've said, about the government in Westminster and the Scottish Parliament. They provide our national services, for example, the health service, defence, etc. The policies and direction come from elected politicians at either Westminster or the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood. So there will be someone in charge of, for example, health in Scotland, and the Health Minister for Scotland will make the big decisions about how health is run in Scotland. The departments are run by employees or civil servants, as we like to call them, and finance comes from taxation. All sorts of taxes are paid, whether it's income tax from employees, corporation tax from companies, etc. That's how they earn their money. They aim to provide a service, improve society, and make effective use of the funds that they are being given in the form of taxation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to something that's really important. I have to point out to you because people get really confused with this. Many pupils get confused between the public sector, which is what we've just spoken about, and public limited companies. They are very different. The public sector serves the general public. They're there to provide us with essential services like education, health, etc. Public limited companies are in the private sector, but they sell their shares to the general public on the stock exchange. They're in the private sector and they're there to make profits, to grow, to do all those sorts of things. This is normally a really good comparison question in the exam, and you're going to see this question in your notes with a good solution on how you would actually answer this question. It's a very common question. Moving on to the third sector now. There are different aspects of the third sector, and the first one are charities. Charities are organisations formed to raise money for underprivileged people or people in need. And I'm sure you're all aware of some charities that you've maybe used or contributed to or your family have in the past. They are run by trustees. Now, normally these people are actually voluntary workers. They're not paid to do the job that they do in the running of the charity. Charities raise money through charity shops, which are a big thing nowadays on a lot of our high streets, donations from the public, or from companies, and lottery money. They rely big time on lottery funding if they can. Clearly, charities need to be run and they cost money to run. So, for example, the Accord Hospice relies on a lot of volunteers. However, there will be paid staff in the form of doctors and nurses, and these expenses have to be paid. The surplus, after all of these expenses are paid, goes to the good cause that they are there to serve. As I've said already, they rely on voluntary workers who clearly are not normally paid for the work that they do. Now, I've got some advantages and disadvantages of charities on this next slide here. Good things, the advantages are obviously on the left and the disadvantages are on the right. Charities are exempt. That means they don't have to pay some taxes. For example, VAT and corporation tax. Corporation taxes are paid on profits, and charities don't make profits, so they're exempt, they don't have to pay that. You tend to find charities have low wage costs due to volunteers who are working for free, and private companies like to see themselves as doing something good, being socially responsible, etc., and they are normally willing to donate or sponsor charities, which is really good because it's a good way for them to get an income. However, it can be difficult for charities to raise money during times of recession because people don't have spare cash to be able to put into the charities, and they rely heavily on volunteers who can actually be difficult to get a hold of. The next part of the third sector are what we call social enterprises. And social enterprises trade in normal markets selling goods or services. So they are actually operating similarly to a private sector organisation in that they are there to provide goods and services to customers. However, it's what the social enterprises do with any profit they make that makes them different from the private sector. For example, they will normally have some form of social or environmental aim as opposed to making profits for the owners. They do make profits, but the profits go towards the good cause that they are there to support. You can see in the slide there's a picture of a big issue, a copy and edition of the big issue, and the big issue is a social enterprise. So an entrepreneur came up with the idea of creating a magazine that they were going to make at a relatively cheap price and sell at a higher price. And what happens with the profit from the making and to the selling of the product is that goes towards helping people who are homeless. So yes, a profit's made on the sales of the big issue, but it's what they do with the profit that makes it different from a private sector organisation. The profits they make are instead reinvested, as we say, towards achieving the purpose. In other words, cutting back on homelessness, cutting down on homelessness. Now, some advantages and disadvantages here of social enterprises which might be of interest. Now, on the next slide, there are a number of video links for social enterprises here. Two of the links are just telling you the background and information about social enterprises. And the third link is actually about a social enterprise called The Social Bite, which is really, really interesting for you to watch. So these are all links, and I suggest you have a good look at them. The final slide is on voluntary organisations, and these are also in the third sector. These don't tend to be examined, but it's interesting to know about them anyway. So we've had charities, we've had social enterprises, and now we have these other voluntary organisations. These are there to provide a service for members and the local community. So we're thinking about things like maybe a youth football team or a golf club or a bowling club, things like that. They raise finance predominantly through membership in the form of subscriptions. So people will pay a subscription to join a golf club, etc. They are controlled by an elected committee and helped by volunteers. So you'll tend to find the committee will make decisions on behalf of the voluntary organisation, and there will be volunteers. So, for example, if the golf club has a bar, then on a Saturday there may be a rota of volunteers, of members who go and help out at the bar. Now, these two other sectors, the public sector and the third sector, are really important because a common question will normally be you comparing the private sector to another one of these sectors. It's normally the public sector, to be fair, or you may be asked to distinguish between different objectives they have, etc. So it's really, really important you know how each of these types of organisation in the public and third sector as well are owned, controlled, and financed. These are the normal questions that you will get. Thank you very much. There will now be a set of past paper questions that you will be tackling on this. In fact, I think it's perhaps a task asking you to compare the different sectors of the economy, and there will be a task for you to do after that. Okay, good luck. Thank you.